Alright, it is good to go. Sorry about that reflection in the mirror. Not much I can do about that unless yeah, wish I could put the lampshade on there, but then this room would be too dark and my camera doesn't pick it up. Alright, so a couple things I want to talk about in this stream. It's maybe a short stream if nobody else shows up. Oh, and I don't know if you can hear that buzzing in the background, but that apparently that is my mouse. I am not sure why, but whenever it is face down on the desk, you get a weird buzzing in the background. So I gotta make sure to flip it upside down after starting the stream. Oh well, that's I don't know if that's something wrong with my laptop or what. I was trying to figure out what was causing that. So the main thing I want to talk about today is the State of the Union address that was last night. And actually, this calling the stream the State of Disunion because it's never been more apparent than what we saw with the reaction of Democrats for a lot of talking points when Trump was discussing things that were overall positive for should be positive things for both sides. Many Democrats outright refused to clap or cheer or stand up. They sat there and crossed their arms and showed disgruntled looks on their faces for things that you're like, he's talking about jailing sex traffickers, and these people sit down or they stay seated. He's talking about smuggling people into the United States against their will and forcing them to indentured servant, not indentured servant, like what's the word um not indentured servant. What's the other term? It's not slavery is not the right word. Although slavery is an appropriate term, there's some other term that is just eluding me at this point in time. Oh, I need to pull up the actual Hangout itself so I can see the chat if anybody's in there. Give me a second here. Hopefully the buzzing isn't too bad. Live control room. Okay, I'll pop out the chat. And I'll try to pay more attention to that, and I don't have a guest on to talk to, so I guess that means I'll be checking that a little more often. There we go. Flip that mouse upside down. Alright. Sorry, give me 1 second here. We need to pull. Hang on. Alright. In case anybody joins. Alright. So, yeah, the disunion things that should be. I mean, almost the entire State of the Union that Trump delivered was things as like, okay, these aren't Republican specific talking points. These are talking points that both parties agree on for the most part. The only area where it was most of the things should have been bipartisan. Most of the things are say, hey, Democrats and Republicans both say we want these things. Hey, more employment. Yes, employment is great. And yet Democrats sat their arms folded. Nope, we're not going to applaud that more people are working in the more blacks and Latinos are working than they have in the past couple of years and under different administrations. Nope, nope, not a point worth applauding. But yet they claim to be the party of minorities, um, and yet they, you know, oh, when more blacks and more Latinos are working, then and making more money, not just working is like, oh, well, they've got jobs. It's no, they've got better paying jobs than they had under previous administrations. That's why they're working at the moment. If you look at the overall numbers, it's job jobs in general. This is okay. Let me go off on a tangent here. Jobs in general is not a good metric for how well a country is doing. This is something I don't know if this is the exact words of Hayek, but this is the way it's easy to remember if you've ever watched the what was it called, the fight of the century. So basically it's a rap video that is summing up the arguments between Hayek and Keynes. And there was two versions of this. One was about the animal spirits. That it was all right for an earlier attempt, but the second version of the fight of the century was absolutely amazing. Because the theme, yeah, all right, that's another whole tangent. But if you haven't seen it, it's from Econ Stories. Uh, really, really well made. But one of the lines from the movie, or from the video, um, Hayek makes the argument that you can have uh, everybody staffed in the army or the country's armies and fleets and have one full employment and nothing to eat. And I don't know if that's the exact, that's not the exact quote from Hayek, obviously from his speech that he gave at the original debate, because it was an actual debate between Keynes and Hayek. But he did say something to those lines, is like, yeah, you can have 100% unemployment in jobs that are not producing anything. So you could have, oh yeah, we our unemployment is zero, and you're like, yeah, but you've got people out there shoveling rocks, and then other people taking those same rocks and putting them back in holes. That's not productive. There's no reason to do that. It, and yet that was something Keynes actually proposed in one of his books. Not, although a little drawn out, because he was talking about burying bonds in caves, sealing up the caves, and then having people pay for permission to dig up those bonds and then sell them, or then exchange them for money from the U.S. Treasury. And he was advocating that um, as a way to stimulate the economy and actually boost production. I mean, like, you're paying some people to bury something that will increase in value because it is a bond, and then somebody else is going to pay for the privilege of unearthing that bond, so that way they can exchange that for money from the government. This is absolutely idiotic. Uh, you break down the mathematics, and so not only is it not producing anything worthwhile, but it's not a sustainable model, because the government would have to pay out more than it's getting in. And it is paying out, not only paying the people to bury it, and the amount of money they're going to get in return from people paying for the privilege to dig it up does not account for how much they're spending on paying exchange bonds for currency, and then also the money they're going to spend on the people who buried it. Mathematically, they're losing money every time this occurs. It's not a sustainable amount anyway. But Keynes, it should be, it's something very easily debunked, like it's simple mathematical proofs, and like this is a flawed system. There's no way this could possibly stimulate an economy, and yet this is something that we actively propose, argue for rather lengthily. Um, rather lengthily, no, that's not the right terminology. Where at length is the better way to say that. All right, so aside from going off on that tangent, the jobs by itself is not a good metric for how well the economy is doing. So, okay. So we got a message from Marianne Cassidy. Marianne, not Marianne. Oh, my brain's not moving. Sorry about that, Marianne. There's no poetry moving. Sounds garbage. Yeah, that might be what I was saying. I was picking up the mouse earlier. Sorry if my audio is not coming through all that well. Except for, I think we don't have to restart because of audio quality, but we'll see. That's interesting. Can you hear me just fine? That's interesting. Yeah, it might just be this laptop. This laptop is pretty bad when it comes to audio. So, sounds okay on my end. Maybe, ooh, then I'm getting a weird echo. That's not good. Okay, okay. No, the live stream is always good. So I'm live right now. If you want to join in,
trying to work on the audio issues, but it sounded just fine when I was setting it up. But apparently, it's a little bit of testing, testing. Hello, hello. Okay, let me change up something here. So I enable this. Is that a little better? Let's see. Turn that off real fast. Just give me did that fix it? Because I'm using a different microphone now. Okay, let's try this again. Hello, can you hear me now? It says it's using the microphone from my camera. Okay, let me try this. Testing, testing. Okay, sorry again about the issues here. See if I'm disable that. If I modify device, is that better? If I fix the audio issue, um, is it coming through clear now? Did that resolve the audio issues? Hopefully. Um, yeah, unfortunately, I can't tell what it sounds like on your end because it sounded just fine from my end. Okay, so I got the affirmative there. You're saying it says it hasn't started. Let me double check that. Um, should be able to go to my channel and see this stream that way. Where the actual link is for it doing it this way. See it on the actual. I see the preview. Sorry about the technical difficulties. I'll try to get back into talking about the State of the Union and things that are actually important rather than today. Oh, yeah, that does sound very garbled. Sorry about that. I'm not sure what I can do about that because I've done everything I can. So there's only one microphone that is enabled, and that's the microphone that I'm using right now.
Testing, testing. Hello. It might just be the internet connection as a whole, as opposed to testing, testing. Oh, okay. Now I can hear myself now, and that definitely fixed it. Okay. All right. So it sounds like that cleared up the issue. Just plugging, unplugging it, and plugging it back in. It's always the IT solution, right? Yeah. Oh, whatever. I don't care if commies join. Let them join. They can argue their stupid cases, and we can. Hey, at least it'll give something to talk about other than the State of the Union. But eh, I so I had a discussion with my brother the other day talking about this because I was on a stream a like a month or so ago, where I was arguing with some commie, but the thing that started the debate was talking about why communism isn't vilified the same way as Nazism. But if you look at the actual history, if you look at where they both stem from, they are both forms of socialism. They both come out of the camp of, um, and Hitler did not. Well, he killed more people in a more obvious manner, in a like more people knew about the atrocities of Hitler long as they were going on, whereas the atrocities in the USSR and in Italy and in China and things like that, what actually occurred didn't come out till a long time after the atrocities had occurred. So there's a big PR campaign in favor of communism, whereas there's a big PR campaign against Nazism. So I got into this debate with this guy about how socialism should be vilified in the same way that Nazism should be vilified. Uh, and it's so bizarre to me that some people are arguing about the intention behind communism. Like, yeah, it doesn't matter if the intentions are good, if the results are always massive death and starvation. So anybody who would continue to support this ideology, they are advocating for a um, hateful ideology. So, it's like rationally, we should start to groups like the SPLC and other organizations should be labeling socialism and communism as hateful hate groups or hateful ideologies, and that's the argument I was making. Is to not necessarily that. Well, I mean, it's always what we should do as opposed to what we are doing. What we are doing is teaching concepts of knowledge as if it's raising population beliefs. And I'm like, man, imagine if it was flipped the other way around, where Nazis had the PL and communism, and the KKK was Hitler praised, and then Hitler and Goebbels. It was Hitler and Goebbels would be praised, and would be statues of them. And he was That's I don't know what it is. Hopefully that fixed it. Ah. Huh. Alright, well, I guess what I'm gonna have to do is have the preview running in the background. Let's see, is there something I can do about this? Testing, testing, trying to fix the audio issues again. I thought this was resolved and it was coming through really clear. Yeah, um, not sure what I can do. Let's see. Let's see. Um, are you saying there's no sound at all right now? It sounds like that's what it from the chat. That's what I'm. Ah, okay. Let's see. So I think I'm just gonna have to deal with listening to myself in my ear. Yeah. I think that's the only way I can tell if my audio has cut out on me and you guys can't hear me. Whatever. Alright, maybe if I don't lean on the desk. I am not sure. I just know on my desktop this is much easier, much smoother. Yeah. And this laptop really sucks. It's a bit old and it has a yeah, and I have an issue where if I don't mute the volume on my laptop and I close the laptop, I get this really loud squealy feedback because even if I've disabled all of the microphones on the PC, yeah. Oh, now I'm hearing myself in my headphones. It's so bad. Let's see if I turn down the volume on that web page. Maybe that'll be a little less distracting, but at least I can tell if the audio is coming through. Okay. Alright, there. Now I can hear myself mumbling in the background, and if it ever dips out, I'll know you guys can't hear me at all. Okay, so I started talking about communism and Ocasio-Cortez. Alright, so I keep going back and forth on which is worse. The people who don't know any better and yet pursue things versus the people who absolutely do know better and yet still pursue these harmful ideologies. Because ultimately the outcome is still the same. Whether you know you're doing evil or you're doing evil unintentionally, the end result is still evil. You're still getting those evil outcomes. And if you watch the State of the Union, Ocasio Cortez only stood up once. Um, oh, I forget what it was during. I mean, she pretty much sat down through the entire thing, and there was one occasion where she did stand up. Oh, I forget what he was talking about. But before standing up, she looks over at the person next to her and has a little discussion before deciding, oh, okay, I guess this is worth standing up for 5 seconds. Yeah. I think it was when he was talking about the number of the employment being up for women. I think that was what he was talking about. I'll have to double check that afterwards. If I'm wrong on that, please let me know if you know better. But that was one of the big talking points where he was talking about um, I forget. He was talking about, so he mentioned two things when it comes to women specifically, how Congress now has more women than it has ever had in the history of the United States. And they cheered for that and they stood up and they were bragging about it. It's like, well, that's not something that the president had anything to do with. The other talking point he had was unemployment was at like I don't know if it's an all-time low, but it's right around there for women overall. Um, That's not something Ocasio Cortez actually said. Of course, we can go to the sun. We just have to go at night. And that's, but it's on par with some of the things that she's actually said. Yeah, yeah, to the best of my knowledge, she's never actually said that. But okay, one of the big things that's was she has talked about billionaires or any society that allows for the existence of billionaires is immoral, and yet she wants to tax anybody who earns more than 2 million at 70%. It's like anything that you earn more than $2 million is going to be taxed at 70%. Um, that sort of thing is going to destroy billionaires in the United States. Being taxed at 70%, so every dollar you make over 2 million, you're getting you're getting 30 cents for every dollar. Billionaires won't exist anymore, and as companies move to other places or become less productive because there's less money to reinvest in themselves, billionaires will start to disappear. And then she will have no, like, as soon as everybody, so this is typical of socialism. Right? I mentioned this on Twitter as well. Like, this is a Margaret Thatcher quote. The problem with socialism is eventually run out of other people's money. And that's what's going to happen under Ocasio Cortez's plan.
she starts off taxing the billionaires, and everyone's like, yeah, this is great. But as you tax something, it reduces. Over time, the billionaires will become less and less either inclined to produce, or they will be less able to produce because their income has been so drastically reduced. It's not just their personal income. This is the thing. This thing that socialists and a whole bunch of these people don't understand. Is if you are worth $10 billion, you don't keep all of that under your mattress. There's no Scrooge McDuck vault that you jump into at night with all of your money. These people buy mansions. These people buy yachts. They buy luxury cars. They go out to fancy dinners. They buy things. They invest in new businesses, whether they start up businesses themselves out of their own pocket, or they take that money and put it in the stock market, which means it goes to a stock market and buys stocks in a company. And a company that either increases the value of the stocks that the company currently has, so that way they can sell the remaining of their stocks and generate for the business, or the company sold it to these billionaires in the first place, in which case they have more capital to reinvest in the business to research for R&D or building out their sound
Keep, yeah, keep plugging and unplugging my mic. That seems to, because it seems to fix it when I plug it back in. Maybe that's what I need to keep doing. No, not again. What? Did I cut out completely? I can still hear myself on the video. And I didn't hear myself dip out. I don't know how to fix this. I've disabled all the microphones except for this one. I'm not sure what else I can do. It's just the bad sound card in this laptop apparently. But there's nothing I can do about that for the next 2 months or so. So just kind of bear with it. Sorry about the audio issues. Okay, anyway. Yeah, so what's going to happen? Yeah, so like I said, so these billionaires, they invest their money in the stock market or in banks or in something else. What happens is that money ends up going to other companies that they're investing in, and then those companies hire more employees or build new facilities or do more research and development, build better products which or lower the cost of their current products. This is how the economy grows. And if a billionaire is, instead of investing their money how they see fit, is actually sending that money off to the government is giving that money to welfare programs or their endless list of money pits. The economic return on what government spends money on is nowhere near what the private sector does. If you look at investments that the government has made, more often than not, their investments fail. If you look at someone like Berkshire Hathaway, which is Warren Buffett's investment group, they have a really good track record of picking winners. The U.S. government is almost the exact opposite of it. Dang it. Cord being taken. I hope it's not this headset. This is an expensive studio headset from. What is it? Alright. Maybe that end of the cable came loose, and that's why I keep getting audio issues. It's not so much the end in the computer. Alright. I don't know. I'll just have to keep unplugging and plugging it back in. Seems to be the only thing that kind of works. Yeah, just keep letting me know whenever the audio cuts out. But like I was saying, Warren Buffett, his Berkshire Hathaway has a pretty good track record of picking winners. They've been, I mean, it's not perfect or anything along those lines, but it's a really good track record. The U.S. government is almost the exact opposite. I mean, for every failure that Berkshire Hathaway gets, the U.S. government, maybe that's their equivalent of successes. You're talking about like if Berkshire Hathaway is making like 70%, picking 70% winners over losers, the government is picking
30% winners. Overall, they're losing money in every investment the government makes. And so what that leads to is the government is bad at choosing winners and losers because really they have no skin in the game. The idea that a lot of people in government, and the idea that was proposed by Keynes, is as long as the government's spending money, it's good for the economy. It doesn't matter where they're spending money, but as long as they're spending money, because that gets the economy, the animal spirits going. As long as there's movement in the economy, it's good. That's what Keynes is arguing for, and a lot of people, Republicans and Democrats in Congress, it's like the frequency between audio issues is more and more rampant. Ooh, sorry about the light. Can't do anything about that because there's a mirror there, and I've tried putting it other places. It doesn't help the situation. Alright, maybe if I put the microphone in my mouth, that'll help either, but yeah. Sorry about the audio issues. I wish I could fix that. I wish it was a little bit better, but this is the best I can do. Maybe I should switch over to my cell phone. Actually, I don't know if I can do that on the live stream here. I have it still live streaming. Oh well. Like I was saying, it's like they have this their view of things is it doesn't matter how you spend money as long as you're spending money, which is absolutely idiotic. Because you're actually, when the money is yours and you know how much it took to earn that money, you tend to spend that money more wisely. When you're looking at investments, you're more likely to do your full research on it. You're more likely to talk with people, not insider information, but get the inside scoop. It's not or inside trading, but you want to make sure that your investment is getting the most rate of return as possible, which means you're looking for those new technologies and you research the companies like, okay, is this a legitimate technology or is this
Or is this a passing fad? Things along those lines. Because if you worked 100 hours for the amount of money you have in your pocket, you don't want it to disappear after 5 seconds of a bad investment. The government doesn't work for their money. What do? They tax people. They pass bills, or they get the IRS to audit people. That doesn't cost them. It doesn't. I can't say it doesn't cost them a dime. Well, the Congress people out of their personal pocket. No, no. This it's not the mic. That's my PC. Like, this is a $200 headset. This Sennheiser, whatever. This is yeah. It's the audio card of my PC. Let me let me switch mic. Let me test this and switch it to my camera from my or camera microphone. Maybe that'll fix things. Who knows? Okay. So if I enable that, and then I switch it up here. Okay. Can you hear me now? Is that better? I can't hear myself at all on the other stream. Give it a second to catch up. Alright, let me test this. Testing, testing. Okay. We'll see, because right now I've got that going. Let's disable that. Hello, hello, hello. Testing again, testing again. Can you hear me? Alright, well at least oh, there's that glare again. Sorry. I wish there was something somewhere else I could sit, but that's... Alright, hopefully that fixes the audio issues, and maybe it is
maybe it's the port on my laptop, and so my camera is using the USB. Hopefully that fixes the issue. Oh, that's right. I don't use my headset during regular recordings. I use the Yeti. I got a Blue Yeti microphone, and I've got a pop filter and stuff like that. That's why I mean the headset's always go up. Hmm. Yeah. I was like, oh yeah, that's how I usually do these setup, and I don't have any issues with the Blue Yeti. Okay. So maybe it is the microphone on this has gone bad, although that's not a good thing because this headset's not even a year old, and like I said, this is a $200 headset. It shouldn't have a bad microphone. I don't know. Okay. Okay, what was I talking about before getting back to audio issue nonsense? Okay, the government is bad at investing because really they have no skin in the game. If a politician chooses something, a waste of money, right? They're like, oh, this is the next big thing, and they invest $1 billion in it, and that company goes belly up. Like what was this? Solyndra, right? Obama was really big on Solyndra, and I forget how many billions they gave that company, or maybe it was millions, but either way, the company went bankrupt because they had an unsustainable business model. The solar panels are too expensive. People weren't buying them. Um, there's very few investments where the government has put money towards where they actually got money back. And if they fail, what are the ramifications? They charge more, they just raise taxes next year. If they run out of money to invest in things, well, next year we still get our full amount of money back because we were taxing people. Now with a private business, if they spend poorly, they have less money the next year to use and invest. Oh yeah, so dude, there's trillion dollars spent on fighter jets that we don't have. Um, was it a $4 trillion cell phone app or something stupid like that? It was no, people have broken this down and brought out all these stupid spending things. Not Ron Paul, Rand Paul was like listed he went on for like 20 minutes talking about all of these things that the government spent their money on that no, like was it like the mating habits of pigeons or something while on cocaine or maybe it was squirrels or something stupid. And you're like, why would this be a research thing that anybody would put money towards? What is the practical outcome of this? What do they hope to find out? It's like, oh well, this is what their behavior is while on drugs. Why is that relevant? Why would you? But hey, it's a government grant, and that person applied for it, and the government's just handing out taxpayer dollars because if they invest poorly, what is the downside for the government? Politicians aren't paying anything out of their own pocket. They get their salary whether they do a good job or not. Government shut down and they still get paid. People who work at menial government jobs, they were the ones who weren't getting paid. Congress was doing jack squat, and they were getting paid their, $200,000 a year. Is it $200,000 a year or $120,000 a year? Uh, okay, I know the president is a quarter million a year. Um, wait, training mountain lions on treadmills? Yeah. Oh, okay. So I was trying to get back on track talking about the State of the Union, but yeah, when politicians spend your money, they have no incentive to spend it the best way possible. When a business spends money, or when a billionaire spends their money, they have every incentive to try to maximize their investment. Now, if we tax you on your investments, not only will you not have as much to invest in the best way possible, but you also will have less incentive to work. You're like, well, I could work an extra month, and if I could see the full benefit of that, if I could see, well, even 60% of that, it might be worth my time and effort. But if I'm only going to get 30%, maybe I'll just call it, let's say, hey, you know what, I've worked 11 months out of the year. I'm just going to not work this last month, and because I'm tired of working an entire month for 300 or 30,000 or whatever. I mean, I guess at that point, I forget how much it would be per month. Oh, here's the other thing, is if you're being taxed at 70%, it may not be worth your while to actually work that extra month. Because people who are working at that level where they're earning $1 million a month and things along those lines, if they're being taxed at 700,000 a month, their monthly expenses may exceed that 30% of their annual or their monthly income or their annual income. I mean, however you break it down. Usually your living expenses, even for somebody who is a billionaire, you're talking about they're jetting around the world, so private planes, private flights, personal staff, personal bodyguard, security, um, hotel rooms, limos. Their living expenses are higher than, I mean, part of that, like, yes, they could scale that down, right? They could eat at less fancy restaurants. They could drive, they could hire, regular Uber to travel them around whenever they could go coach flying places. But what's the point? If they're used to living a certain way, and by working an extra time or whatever, if that exceeds, if all of their work would exceed the 30% of, if the cost of doing business would exceed that 30% margin, they just wouldn't work. And this is something Peter Schiff has talked about pretty extensively on his program, and it's not unfeasible that somebody who is earning $1 million a month would have expenses of $400,000 a month. And if you're taxing them at 70%, they're losing money if they work that extra month. So they're just not going to work. And eventually they're going to run out of billionaires, and then they're going to go to the petty bourgeoisie, right? If all the people who are earning more than $2 million a year are the bourgeoisie, anybody who earns from 100,000 to 2 million is going to be the petty bourgeoisie. And they're like, oh, well, we're out of billionaires, so they all either left the country, we can't tax them, or they just stopped working, because they would be losing money the more they work, so they just work to the point where they get $2 million a year and they're happy with that. Okay, well, let's start taxing everybody who's under that, and they'll tax all of them to oblivion, and then they'll be stuck with people who, 100,000 and under, and they're like, well, you guys are the new bourgeoisie. We're gonna tax all of you guys now. That's how it always goes. That's exactly what we saw in Venezuela. It's exactly what we see in all of these countries. It's a cycle that keeps repeating itself, and that's what Ocasio-Cortez wants, and it was readily apparent in all of her stances, or I guess lack of stances, during the State of the Union address yesterday. The few things she stood up for were just like, okay, but you didn't stand. And the more telling thing was the thing she didn't stand up for. Is like, dude, did you just hear what he said? He was talking about, freeing 1,500 people from sex trafficking rings in 2018. He was saying, yeah, 1,500. This is a point that stuck out to me. It's like, yeah, 1,500 people were freed from sex trafficking. And if you look at the Democrats, dude, Schumer wasn't applauding or standing up. What's her name? Kamala Harris was just sitting there, kind of scowling, and they're all just like, some of them may have clapped, but it was like a handful of them. It's just like, and then one of the more bizarre things is Trump made a point where he was talking about children that have been born and how the United States is going to protect them. I didn't see any Democrats clapping after that. I was like, you guys are out of your freaking minds. He's not talking about abortion. He's not talking about even premature babies, or he's talking about just children who were born. I mean, he wasn't, okay, the Democrats are obviously going to fight when it comes to abortion, because that's their, their pet projects is, women's rights and all that sort of thing. They're not going to fight, they're not, okay, that's a hill that they're willing to die on, right? So when it comes to abortion, you're talking about a fetus that is, any point during gestation. Okay, they're not going to clap for that. Okay, you start talking about 9 months. That's where you think maybe some Democrats would start switching sides, but he's talking about children that have already been born, and not necessarily children that have been born prematurely, children that have been born through the regular process. And he's talking about medical care and and the United States' determination to reduce the number of infant mortality rates when it comes to children who were born naturally. Like, that's, as far as I could tell, that's what he was talking about. And Republicans were standing up and cheering and all that sort of thing, and Democrats were just sitting there like, oh, how dare he talk about saving children and saving lives. And I'm like, these people can't even be can't even cheer for somebody being relieved from a life of being a sex worker against their will. They can't even cheer when infant mortality rates are down or America's stance on trying to protect infants. These things are absolutely bizarre. I couldn't watch the entire thing. I mean, at that point, I was like, okay, I've gotta start the stream. I watched, or listened through most of it while getting this whole thing set up, so I didn't see the entire clip. And although in some stations have different angles and different shots, and so the ABC broadcast that I watched only was like when the Republicans stood up, they focused on the Republicans and occasionally panned to certain Democrats and all that sort of thing. It's a little difficult to get a full view of everything, but everybody's been talking about this on Twitter and sending different clips of what was going on and all that sort of thing. Just really, really bizarre how much of a divide there is between Republicans and Democrats, because initial people who started talking about it last night were talking about, like, yeah, this is entirely strategic on Trump's part, because he put as much in his speech that should be bipartisan. Okay, so yeah, the Democrats are going to fight him on abortion. Okay, Democrats are going to fight him on the wall. Okay, but he's talking about situations that should be bipartisan. Everybody should be able to cheer. Everybody should be able to, like, okay, you got to grant us this. The economy is doing well. Okay, and a couple hand claps, maybe one or two Democrats standing up. Everybody in the Republican section cheering. I was like, yeah, the economy's doing well. There's less unemployment, which, like I started when I started, it's like, yeah, unemployment's not the only factor, but people are also working. More people are working, but they're also working at higher wages. I mean, not necessarily all of them, but if you're looking at the overall percentage, GDP is increasing, which means that means the economy is doing better. It's not just more people working, it's more people working at higher incomes, and less people on welfare and all that. So I mean, the economy is in general doing really, really well. Now, he also mentioned the stock market, but again, that's not a good indicator overall of the health of the economy, because, as we know, there are bubbles on top of bubbles. There's a huge auto industry bubble, there's a huge stock market bubble, and there's a huge well, the housing bubble is reinflating, and what's the other big one? Health insurance, due to Obamacare and all of that sort of thing. There are multiple very large bubbles that, even though it is overall a good thing that there's no longer a mandate for, let's see, I forget what he called it. Like, there's no longer a fee if you don't have insurance, right? If you don't have insurance, you're not charged anything. Oh, hang on a second here. Oh, okay. So I got a comment here from Marianne, which Democrats versus Republicans. Nothing but divide and conquer. People wasting their time demanding their own enslavement. And that's something I am not certain. Okay, I'm gonna end that stream in the background because I haven't had an audio issue since I switched over to my camera, so I think it's safe to. And it was very, very distracting to hear myself in the background 5 seconds late. In general, yes. Like, if you're talking about Republicans as a whole, Democrats as a whole, when it comes to what they've actually achieved in politics and what government can actually achieve, it's, yeah, it's like I really like this analogy that My Two Cents was saying. It's whether you choose to die by lethal injection versus versus having your head cut off. Like, you're still going to die in the end. One is, one is less painful. Actually, I'm not sure which one would be less painful, or one is less, there's less agony behind it, and, there's less anticipation. I think I would prefer the beheading, because that seems like that would be quick and relatively clean, and if the blade is heavy enough, it's going to be instantaneous, versus the lethal injection, which, yeah, can go incredibly wrong, and yeah, anyway, I don't know which one would be less painful and all that sort of thing, but, like, if you had the choice, you're like, wait a minute, but I'm still going to end up dead either way. I would like option C, where I don't die, and it's not painful, and it's not... like, where is that option? Yes, so I do think when you're comparing Democrats versus Republicans, Republicans are the lesser of two evils, but still ultimately doing evil. I think Democrats have gone are so, like, they're not even trying to hide anymore, because especially when they're talking about this abortion issue. Yeah, that's option C, I think, is, well, libertarian is what most people consider option C, and I'm like, but libertarians don't go far enough, and at least my personal stance is, all the people who are in the chat or who know me, is, I think anarcho-capitalism is the way to go. I think that is the ultimate end goal for any society, and the closer we can get towards that end goal, the better. Now, I probably will differ with a lot of you on how we achieve that goal, because a lot of people will dismiss the government completely as a vehicle that can be used to achieve that ends. And I say that's not a practical way of viewing things. Now, I'm not of the opinion that you can use the government to dismantle itself. That's the Adam Kokesh perspective. I think that's ultimately flawed. But you cannot achieve an anarcho-capitalist society as long as government keeps growing. If the goal is the lowest government, or lowest form of government possible, having a government constantly inflating is counterproductive towards that end goal of having the smallest amount of government possible, or ultimately no government at all. So whatever we can get done that will decrease that will either grow the government more slowly, or possibly lead to the government actually reducing in size, anything that is along those lines, I'm in favor of. And this is when so I know there's a huge debate amongst libertarians and anarcho-capitalists over the wall itself, which Trump brought up in the State of the Union. He was talking about, this wall is going to add security. So my problem is, and I am very much in the Stefan Monolu camp when it comes to the wall, in that we need a wall, not because we don't, the freedom of association and all that sort of thing, but as long as we have a welfare state in the United States, as long as we have government incentives, as long as we have mandates on what we have to provide for people, hospitals have to provide treatment even for people that can't pay for it. Well, that comes ultimately, and who's going to pay the hospital back for their expenses? Otherwise, well, if the government doesn't pay for them currently because of the mandates the government has placed on hospitals, the whole, the hospital may get overwhelmed with people showing up with no insurance and causing the hospital to go into economic collapse, and then, hey, then there's no hospital for anybody. And so then it's like, well, we gave you this mandate that you have to treat anybody who comes through here without checking their insurance, and you check their insurance later. What the government does is it subsidizes those hospitals because it's made these mandates on them. if we didn't have policies like that, where we're subsidizing bad behavior and it's coming at taxpayer expenses, if somebody and nothing, we owed them absolutely nothing. They came across the border, nothing was giving to them, and they had to do everything on their own. They had to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. If that were the case, then I would have no problem with them coming over, because at that point there is no, illegal immigration and all that sort of thing. It's just somebody moving from one place to another, which that would be fine. But as long as we have the welfare, have open borders, and this is uh, yes, okay, so Marianne put in the comments there, minarchy would never happen, innovating government out of existence would be the best option, and that is my personal plan, because, so Adam Kokesh, for some reason, is trying to use the government to fight the government, which I think it's ultimately flawed in its inception, or the way he's presenting it, or, maybe just the whole way through. And while I am in support of politicians who don't grow the government as much, I think ultimately, if I were to run for office or to become a politician, I would do it on the platform, not of I'm going to dissolve the government or anything along those lines, which is what Adam Kokesh has stated his platform is, which is, it seems absolutely insane, and nobody's going to vote for him on that policy. He's not going to get even a fraction of the vote if that's his argument, because nobody's going to bother listening to what he has to say after that. He sounds like a crazy person. I would be, if I was in charge of a government, or possibly, president or senate or something like that, the proposals that I would make would be to privatize certain areas of the government. That should be the first thing that we start doing is, okay, here's an area of the government we either can't afford, or it's not really a responsibility of the government. Privatize that. We're going to sell it off, and we're going to use the proceeds to go pay for our other programs or whatever. But ultimately, the more we privatize the government, that's the way to do this. And my idea for how to do that is something I've had in my head for a while, is a government a la carte, which is something that wouldn't be possible prior to the revolution of the computer and the internet. So granted, they spent however many billions on some stupid the Medicare, or was it the Obamacare website, or the Affordable Health Care Act, or was it the Affordable Health Care Act? I think, is that the name of the official act or whatever? They spent an absorbent amount on this website that crashed and was it was like $100,000 website that they spent millions on. It's absolutely insane. Now, me working on my personal desktop, I could put together a pretty robust website that can handle a large amount of traffic, and basically it would be a page for each division of the current government. And rather than collecting taxes, people would just donate to the things that they, or send funds to whatever programs they would want to support, and then don't send money to programs they don't want to support. And if you got the entire government broken down like that, what you would see is people investing in the military, because people believe in the military and that's the defense for the country. Okay, you'd have people investing in that. You'd have people investing in the EPA. You'd have people investing in Planned Parenthood or whatever, and you have people investing in everything. And you'd see stupid programs that nobody, or you'd actually see funding for Planned Parenthood drastically reduced compared to what our government currently gives to them. Okay, but the people are, rather than having Congress decide where the people's monies go, the people would be deciding where their money goes. Now, so that would be something that the government could institute, and this is something that's just like, even if it's not a direct use of funds, like, so you could even have this set up so that way, okay, if my tax burden is, let's say, $20,000 a year. if that's my tax burden, well, I could go on this website and dictate where that $20,000 goes. Oh yeah. Kokesh is not. I don't know if he's always been that way, or if it's something more recent, which it seems like a complete shift in his behavior ever since he was since the raid on his compound, and compound's probably not. That sounds a little more malicious. The raid on his property, and when he went to jail and he wrote his book, he seems to have a pretty distinct shift in his personality and what he's saying. Yes, I do know of Larkin Rose. I have absolutely nothing that I disagree with him on, other than the policy of open borders. Because when it comes to that, I think the principle is correct, that yes, we should have open borders. The problem is we can't currently have open borders because that encourages the increase in the size of our government. Having open borders in the United States increases the number of immigrants, both legal and illegal, and overwhelmingly, if you look at statistics, immigrants to America vote overwhelmingly for more social programs because that's more akin to where they came from. And this is even true within the United States. People fleeing California because it's tanking and falling apart are going to Texas, and they are voting for all of the policies that are the same as the state they just left that was falling apart. Now you've got people leaving third world countries that are falling apart, and they're coming to the United States. They're going to vote for the same things that they just left that destroyed their country. That's a problem. Now, if we close down our borders completely for a few years, stop growing the size of the government, or at least decrease the rate of the government growth. Yeah, I've seen Larkin Rose's and Adam Kokesh's responses to them, and Kokesh definitely seems like he's hiding something or is being dishonest about things. It's pretty bad. But my view on how this could be handled, I don't think it would get much support in Congress, but if it could, you just have this website and you're like, okay, I put however much of my money into taxes. Okay, I had to pay that taxes. Now I get to specify on this website how much goes to what. I could have the entire thing go to the military, or I could have portions of it going to whatever project. Or if I could personally dictate where my tax money goes to, I find it very difficult to think that if something like this was proposed, that both sides would object to it. I mean, not the people in Congress would probably object to it, because it would essentially make it impossible for them to shut down the government based on a lack of funding or the lack of passing a budget, because their budget would be dictated by what people specify their tax dollars go to. And this site is not going to be expensive to maintain. A site that could manage this and handle all this. I mean, we've got the technology. We have all kinds of. You're talking about a few, like, to get a site like that running that has a section for each department of the government and allows somebody to dictate where their tax dollars goes to directly. 1 to 2 million tops, like to build and then maintain. I mean, or that would be to build. I think $2 million tops to build, and then maintenance you're talking about maybe $100,000 a year, something stupid like that. Is inconsequential when you're talking about a government that spends whatever it is, 4 point something trillion a year. Yeah, okay. So more information about the Kokesh thing. I know a good deal of it. I probably don't know everything, but I know enough to know that I am on Larkin Rose's side on this. I used to be a big fan of Adam Kokesh. I can't support him in really anything he's currently saying at the moment. And he seems like a very dishonest person, and maybe this was the case all along, and I just didn't really start to notice it until after his imprisonment. but it's definitely noticeable after he got out. I mean, it's almost an entire shift in his personality and what he's been arguing for, and he's arguing for things that you're like, wait, that's counterproductive, or that's counterintuitive to what you just said, or it, he used to be pretty consistent on his viewpoints, and Larkin Rose is one of those people where, yeah, I may disagree with him on the practicality of his viewpoints, but he is rock solid. He is the most consistent person when it comes to ANCAP philosophy that I have ever heard. I mean, I don't listen to him like every time he produces a video or anything like that, but every time I do hear him, I'm like, yeah, he's consistent. He's like the Ron Paul of YouTube when it comes to this sort of thing. Okay, so I recommend Death Roll and Voluntary Japan channels. Okay, I will probably check them out. Probably not anytime soon. My schedule is pretty hectic, and I've spent way too much time on this current broadcast. I really need to get my project done. So I'll probably be up for the next 3 hours working on that, trying to finalize it. So that project is due by, I've got to present it Friday, so I've got this evening and tomorrow evening, and I hope to have it done by today, and then I can work on tweaking, you know, cosmetic features tomorrow. Okay, I do need to start wrapping this up. So I wanted to talk about the State of the Union, various things that came up during that. But yeah, if it was up to me, I would propose a website where people could dictate where their tax dollars go to. And what this would mean would be some government programs would be completely without money, and they would just shut down. Because if the budget was dictated by the taxpayers themselves rather than Congress, and Congress wouldn't vote to increase how much they spend, we could actually stay within our means, and we could actually, you know, people could choose where they want it, and that would actually be a huge step towards privatizing everything the government does, because people hopefully start looking at this and be like, well, if people are already choosing to pay for these things, and the things they're choosing to pay for are sustainable because they're willing to pay for these things, why do we need to tax people to pay for these things? Can't they just, you know, like, hey, if you want this protection service, buy into this protection service. You know, like, how is that any different from, hey, do you want this internet service? Okay, if you don't want this internet service, you don't pay for it. But you do want this internet service, okay, you do pay for it. How would that be any different? If, I mean, people would start to draw those connections, and they would start to see all of these things that the government is currently doing that we think have to be funded by taxes. We can start to see, well, people are voluntarily choosing to put their tax money towards these things. Wouldn't they similarly voluntarily pay for these things in order to keep them around or to keep them at the levels? All of these things could become privatized over time. Another option would be to just have a private enterprise that is, and I don't know because this is where you get hazy when it comes to legality and all of those sorts of things. A private enterprise that's basically claims you as a citizen, saying, okay, I am company whatever whatever it ends up being called. Anybody who becomes a client of my company is now considered a citizen of my nation. Because you could have a distributed nation along that way. And if anybody was in the United States and was brought to trial for whatever, you know, breaking the speed limit in the United States, or, you know, driving without a license, or whatever kind of, this company would actually represent them in court, you know, and claim, you know, so I don't know what the logistics of this would be, how successful something like that, but the idea is basically providing every type of service you could think of that a government would provide from a private sector perspective, and proving that you can do all of it better. A single company competing with the government. Now, granted, this would probably get raided by, you know, SWAT or the FBI or CIA or something like that and be completely shut down, but it'd be an entertaining experiment to try this. Like, hey, we're just going to start up a company, and we're basically going to start creating services that mimic what the government currently does, and we're going to provide them better, cheaper, faster. People, I mean, getting such an enterprise off the ground would take pretty vast startup and all that sort of thing, startup capital, and The other thing is I don't know if the actual company itself could be hosted inside the United States. Rather, maybe have to be international or something along the lines of what's that called? Sealand or Lieberland or one of these other kind of unclaimed territories. So such a corporation might have to be centrally located in a country that either doesn't care or its own country kind of thing. So that's a little difficult to that idea is something that has been I've kind of contemplating. I was like, whoa, would that even be possible? I don't know. The logistics behind it, you're talking about an investment of billions into trying to achieve what the government does, just trying to say, hey, you've got this company and you've got this thing. I'm going to show you how it can be done better, cheaper, faster. If you can, I mean, that should be something that people would be like, okay, rather than use the government's free service, I'm willing to pay for this because of the benefit I see out of it. And people would stop relying on the government provided service and would rely on this company. So whether that's even feasible, I don't know. But I would think that would be one avenue of doing it without getting into politics directly, is just, I mean, because this is not something that is brand new. This is essentially the idea behind private security right now. Private security is saying, okay, your government-provided police services are inadequate. People are willing to pay for private security because the public security isn't sufficient to their needs. And private security has a good track record of providing better, cheaper, faster when it comes to security services. You could have a company that's like, okay, we're going to provide security, we're going to provide arbitration, we're going to provide defense, anything that you could think of that the government currently provides, this company could provide for you. And they would be your stand-in anytime there is a conflict between the U.S. government and an individual. The company would be your representative and would act on your behalf. So, I mean, again, don't know if it's quite feasible, but I think it's worth thinking about and possibly putting money towards. And that's a lot of the things that I think about along this lines is all what I would do once I start making millions or possibly billions. Right now, I'd kind of like, man, I'd be really excited to make hundreds of thousands, which is why I signed up with the company that I currently signed up with, and I'm in this intense training program. I am in week 5 out of at least 10, possibly 12. And so far it has been kicking my butt, kind of more than I had anticipated when I first got here. But by the end of it, I should have my Oracle certification in Java, and more than likely will be working at a Fortune 200 company by the end of this. Yeah, I'm not going to explain the business model because I'm working for a company, but they're not the ultimate. Yeah, they're not the end company that I'm going to ultimately be working with. It's, yeah, I'm not going to spend more time describing the business model. So while I'm on a 2-year contract, that with the first company, there's a second company that I'm going to ultimately be working directly for, and it's not 100% certain what that company is, although it's a pretty good indicator that it's the company that I've already interviewed with last week. So there's going to be another interview 2 weeks from now, and after that I should hear back whether that company wants to hire me or not. So it's a weird thing. I'll still be under contract with the current company, but I'll be working directly at the facilities for the second company. It's contracting nonsense, or maybe not nonsense, I don't know. Yeah, but being a Java consultant, and so I will be expecting to get a pretty hefty salary once I start that position, with the possibility of becoming a full-time employee with the end client. And then you're talking about, then we're looking at, upwards of 100,000 a year. Okay, so that's what I'm planning on doing over the next 3 years, 2 to 3 years, I should say. But in the meantime, I am working on. So while I've mostly abandoned the idea for Funfair because I can't do anything on it currently. But once those 2 years are up, then I can start working on it again. And the question is, I will also, so at that point, I should have a pretty sizable nest egg to invest. And if the social media climate is still similar 2 years from now, I may dust off Funfair and try to bring it again to market. With, instead of, like, I started off Funfair with a couple $100 in my pocket, and I liquidated investment accounts, and I borrowed money, did a bunch of things to try to get that to market, and ultimately it was not enough because I was hoping during development that I would start to build interest in what I was building, because I was just hammering out the preliminary designs and all that sort of thing, and I've talked about it like any time I had an opportunity. Fund with a D, so correct spelling of fair, but there's a D in between those two. So I will renew my license for the actual .coms and .net and all of that sort of thing. I can do that without issue. As far as building anything software related, I can't risk doing without the potential of the company I'm currently under contract claiming ownership of that product. After the 2 years, I will be free to do it again. So that the question is, because I know the timing for the January of 2019 would have been ideal for a launch. It didn't work out. Did not have the funding, did not have the, if I did launch, I would be losing money every month, and there would not be a user base large enough to support it, because everybody was looking at Subscribestar, everybody was looking at Jordan Peterson's thing, everybody's looking at some other thing, and I'm like, just trying to get people to check it out in the first place was a bit it was a lot harder than initially anticipated, given how much outcry there was against Patreon 2 years ago. I mean, there's all these people complaining, oh, this is terrible, there's the adpocalypse, there's Patreon, and I'm like, you guys aren't even bothering to look at alternatives right now. I'm like, hey, anytime I got a chance, I talked about my alternative, and I'd get 1 or 2 people talking about it and not even bother to look at the site. And I'm like, you're asking me questions, there's a whole Q&A page that answers these questions. You go check it out. Just look at just look at it, read it over, tell me if there's something, like, I was looking for feedback, I was looking for response, I was looking for people to, and the initial interest was, that's not even enough to launch a site that doesn't cost anything to run every month. So, because to run the site, I was looking at costs of about $2,000 a month to maintain. I was like, well, that's easy to maintain when you have a user base of around 100,000 users. I could leverage that to afford to maintain a $2,000 system. I can't leverage 100 people to pay for a $2,000 system. And as far as I could tell from my estimates, maybe 100 people were actually interested enough to join the platform. So that's so the concepts are all there, the technology is there, it has the potential to compete with multi-million-dollar social media sites for a fraction of their operating costs. Like I said, it's $2,000 a month, and that $2,000 a month is extremely scalable. With, if you're talking about for every 100,000 users, it wouldn't be an increase of 2,000. You're probably talking about like, so for every 100,000 users, the maintenance cost might increase by $500, which is absolutely like, not insane, but if you're talking about like, okay, you've got steady fixed increments that you can count on, and if for every 100,000 users you could expect to earn anywhere between 4,000 to 10,000, or so for every 100,000 users you can expect to earn between 4,000 and 10,000, and your operating cost is initially 2,000, but for every 100,000 users on top of that, you might increase your maintenance cost by 500 a month. So I mean, I was just running over basic figures and all that sort of thing. I was like, well, even if my estimates are wrong, and maybe it is 2,000, whatever, it's still the exponential growth of such a system, at least the stability of it, is staggering. And that's what I was looking at. I was like, okay, not only would I be providing a better mousetrap, and so a better service, absolute freedom of speech, better technology, more information to the actual users, which is something that YouTube has been criticized, and this is one of my huge criticisms of YouTube, is, they're not explaining how their system actually works, and they claim that that's to hide from bots and all that sort of thing. Is like, my solution to the problem was providing users with more information. So even if bots are creating channels, or these are, overly researched and overly produced channels, you would know everything that you needed to know about the particular channel, how other people are favoring it, and so the other thing about my particular system is accounts are weighted based on the type of account they were. So if you're just some rando account, you don't really have that, which would be similar to a bot account, you count for very little when it comes to whether you like something, or upvote or downvote or subscribe and all that sort of thing. You count based on how much you interact with the system, what type of account you have. If you're actually putting money into a system, yeah, your vote's going to count more because you're more of a participant. Now, bots are not likely to spend money on a system because that's cost prohibitive. The entire purpose of bots is they're super cheap to roll out, and you can have millions of them for $1, right? That's the idea, is you can have, but if every bot has to at least pay $1 a month, well then to have 1,000,000 of them, you have to have a budget of $1,000,000 a month. That's not something, it's cost prohibitive to have bot accounts on such a network. If a bot account counts for like 1/1000th of a user who pays $1, it becomes cost prohibitive for them to keep, spamming the subscribe and all that sort of thing. Is like, yeah, your subscribe doesn't count. You're a fraction of a subscription when you're counting for the actual numbers and all that sort of thing. So you could have 1,000,000 bots subscribe to a channel, and if they're all these anonymous accounts, an account that has 1,000 actual subscribers is going to pass you by. So that was the idea behind all of that. So the weighted accounts based on your, like somebody like PewDiePie would have a lot of say in what happens on Funfair, because they've got the numbers to back them up of legitimate users. They've got people interacting with their content. They're bringing new people into the site. Yeah, somebody like that you want to encourage, and you want to send more funds their way. You want to send more influence their way. That was how my system was built, and that's all in the infrastructure. And that's what getting the hard part of getting through to people is. That's the fundamental architecture. You change that, the system doesn't exist anymore. You remove these elements that are there to help protect people's freedom of speech. Okay, so one of the other features was being able to export your subscriber list. Originally, that was just like, okay, so imagine PewDiePie gets shut down right now. What does he do? He's the biggest YouTuber on the platform. 80 million people, right? He loses his channel. He loses 80 million How does he get them back? Via Twitter? Maybe a couple million will come back. Getting back up to 80 million, if he had to start a brand new channel today, he could do it faster than he did it the first time. He could probably have a couple, he could probably have like 20 million within the first month or so. Getting back up to 80, yeah, not going to happen. It is not likely to happen within a year of if his channel gets shut down. Now with my system, there was a mechanism in place. It's like, okay, you got 80 million users. You can export that entire user list into a document, start a new channel, submit all of those users to that secondary channel. And this is all, I mean, this could be either, you could store this wherever, I don't know what a size of 80 million users would probably be a pretty hefty sized document. But you could, so say he's got YouTube, PewDiePie channel number 1 that has 80 million. He starts YouTube PewDiePie number 2. Imports that list of all of his subscribers to his secondary channel. And if they, now this is where this user feedback helped me kind of determine what to do here. So the individual users who are subscribed can actually set up their account and be like, okay, don't allow auto imports. But if you don't care, by default, you're like, okay, whatever, allow me to auto subscribe to channels. If they have my information along these lines, then yes, they can auto subscribe me to a channel. If I'm subscribed to channel 1, channel 1 decides to auto subscribe me to channel 2, they can do that. I authorize that on my account. That's something you would set on your user account. PewDiePie uploads his 80 million to his secondary channel. All the people who are auto-subscribed, day 1, they are on channel 2 now. All the people who say, notify me of being auto-subscribed and let me choose, all the people, well, maybe they would join in a couple of days or weeks or months. All the people who say, don't auto-subscribe me, well, he would lose those on his secondary channel. Doesn't matter, that's still head and shoulders above anything that is available on any other platform. So this is a deterrent from my point of view, as an administrator of a site. I'm like, well, if somebody were to take over my platform and become in charge of it, what's the point of shutting down someone's channel? They're just going to export their list somewhere else. I didn't cost them anything. They took their 80 million, moved it to channel 2. Maybe they don't get the full 80 million. Maybe they only get 60 million. Maybe they only get 40 million. Okay, that's a significant hit. But I shut down channel 2. They moved to channel 3. They instantly get that same number. So maybe they went from 80 million to 40 million. Channel 3, they get 40 million again. Shut channel 3 down. Channel 4, instantly 40 million. Shut down channel 4. Channel 5, instantly 40 million. And the thing about my site is, how many, you can start an unlimited number of channels. There's no restriction on that. Your channel is not specifically tied to who you are. There's no email address, there's no phone number assigned. It's just a username and password. This is similar to the mechanics behind Bitcoin. You've got an account and a number. An infinite number of these can be created. There's no limit to the number of accounts. So somebody who wanted to silence or censor somebody would be basically playing whack-a-mole. It's like, okay, I shut down your account. For every account I shut down, 2 more pop up. It is, the way its system was set up is it's so much easier to start a new account and auto-upload your stuff than it would be to shut down the account. So if somebody is in administration and they're trying to silence whatever, they would spend more time shutting down accounts, and every time they did, the person who's like, okay, I'm under attack, all right, we're going to open 100 new accounts. You don't know who these 100 accounts are. I'm going to upload all these subscription lists. You now have 100 accounts that all have 40 million in them. Good luck shutting me down. You've got to go and shut down each of these 100 accounts, and by the time you get halfway through, I'm going to have 400 accounts. And by the time you get done shutting down another 100 of those, I'm going to have 4,000 accounts. You can exponentially grow the size of you. Okay, so that's how you would prevent a malicious. Now, the problem with that is you've got 400 accounts. How do you point somebody to an account that they should be subscribing to? Yeah, you ultimately, as a user or a content creator, you want as few splits in your account as possible, because you want to focus all your attention on growing one particular channel and all that sort of thing. So it doesn't actually benefit a particular user to create 400 different channels and then auto subscribe people. It's because the way the system actually pays people out and all that sort of thing is very much dependent on the interactions that people have with a specific channel. And if you are PewDiePie and you have 400 channels, one of your channels is likely to get all the traffic, and the other 399 are going to be ignored. Like, maybe they'll have a little bit of traffic, like, oh, hey, that one account earned me 2 cents. Okay, that's not your main account. That's the people are going to. Well, there's the other thing, is maybe they're going to split up, and maybe you'll have one channel that has 400 or 40 million or 41 million, and then your other channel has 42 million, and then but that 1 million on one channel is a completely different user base than the second one. So you've got it. Yeah, well, it gets to the point where also you'd have to upload your content to every one of those channels, because there isn't a mechanism in place where you're like, okay, I upload a video on channel 1, it goes to all 400 channels. No, you have to upload each individual video to every channel. So it gets to the point where it's not feasible. Oh, so that was oh, no, never mind. No, I changed that. Because that was the other thing. Never mind. So ignore what I just said about uploading videos to different channels. It's all based on reference. Your video would only ever actually be stored one place, but you could have that same video on multiple channels, just references to the original video. And that was because, you know, if you've got a 4-hour long video, or like one of my streams where I talk about nonsense for 2 hours, that's a lot of information, a lot of data storage. You don't want that repeated 400 times because you've got 400 channels. Rather, you'd have one instance of that video, and then you'd have 400 places where you could play that video, but it's not stored there. It's just saying, okay, play the video. Where's the address of the original video? Okay, pointing to the original video, play it from there. Yeah. Yeah, okay, so but the other thing about the design of my site is it wouldn't. So right now, Gab has a problem, Minds has a problem, all of these, Subscribestar has a problem, all of these alternative sites have a problem in that they become echo chambers for people who have been kicked off of other platforms. Now, the solution I came up with to that was, again, based on Bitcoin and how Bitcoin, it rewards miners. Now, the system I was using has no need for proof of work. There is no reason to have a miner. But you'd still have funds transferring across the network, and you'd still take a percentage of the funds transferring across the network. The way my system was set up is our fees would be deducted when you go to take money out of the network. Raven? I don't know who that is. Yeah, not familiar with the name. Yeah, anyway, so my system is, you can put eventually, or originally started off with money, our fees come out of money as it goes into the system, but BTC actually convinced me, it's like, oh yeah, that is a better system. Is like, okay, you put as much money in the system as you want up front, no charges, no fees, or anything along those lines. When you go to withdraw money from the system, that's when we take our fee out. Actions across the network, that's going to cost us nothing, pennies on the dollar. So the fees that are going to be involved with operating the system is transaction fees from bank to bank and from credit cards to banks and things along those lines. You can't get around that. But once once funds are in the system, they can transfer anywhere within the system. Doesn't cost me a dime. So the $2,000-ish operating cost was based off of a percentage of expected revenue through the system and through the network. based on other systems, their market share and revenue generated per month, sort of thing. Yeah, I don't think I've heard of Darth Revan Reborn. So I mean, I could talk about the concepts behind such a program. So anyway, so I was using a distributed ledger, didn't require proof of work. So transaction cost, or basically the cost to send from one account to another within the system, negligible. You're talking about fractions of a penny per transaction. It's to the point where it's not even bother calculating it. So the only fees would be like credit card fees, because people are like, okay, I'm going to charge this to my MasterCard. I'm going to pay Funfair $50. Well, the MasterCard takes their percentage plus fees and stuff like that. So that would be part of the operating cost of running such a system. Anyway, all the math works out where I could take a small fee at the end when people go to withdraw their money from their account, or from their Funfair accounts to pay for, mortgage or, cell phone bills and stuff like that, whatever they end up using their money for. And yeah, the math works out where I could, as long as based on the amount of usage on the network, there would be enough money in the system. The other thing is it's entirely, the system was entirely scaling. So this is something I figured out there. I think I got this finished in July of last year. No, wouldn't have been July because I would have been traveling. So it was June-ish? May to June, so whatever, working on my home computer. So I got it fixed. So at least for the most part, I said the problem with that is I didn't get to actually test this out on a full working network, but the concept is solid. So the system is set up so that way there are limits to how much you can withdraw at a time. So you may, if you've only got $5 in there and there's not enough money in our account to cover the transaction costs, when you're talking about credit cards and banks, the limit on what you could withdraw at a single time might increase to, okay, you can't withdraw $5 if you've only got $5 in there, but if you had $50, okay, then you could withdraw your full 50, or stuff like that. So in order to reduce our costs to operate within our means, there might be like, okay, because we're kind of low on funds, we've had a bunch of people deposit and nobody withdraw. Right now the withdrawal limits is a little bit higher, so that way we can actually recoup some of our costs. Because, okay, so the way this works, you don't want somebody taking out $50, $1 at a time when you're talking about transaction fees with banks. Now, if you, okay, let me break this down. If you've got an account and you have $100, and this account is in Funfair, if you send $1 to 100 different people in Funfair, don't care. The cost is negligible. Our cost for that entire transaction is probably 0.0001 cent, and that was for all 100 transactions. Now imagine those 100 people all withdrawing their $1 through traditional means, to banks and to credit cards and all that sort of thing. Well, credit cards charge a minimum of 30 cents per transaction, plus 2% of the transaction. But that was the lowest I could actually find when I talk about credit card fees. And the person on the other end is expecting to receive their full dollar. So if we're doing that in order to actually maintain our costs, like if you're talking about, was it 20 cents plus 2, so it's just a single dollar, that would be like 22 cents for every dollar sent out. So 22 times 100, you're talking about yeah, I would have paid out $100 and it would have cost me $22 to pay out that $100. So $100 would go out to the end people $1 at a time, but our cost to do that would be $22. That's a pretty significant amount. If we had $22 in our reserve funds that handles transaction fees and all that sort of thing, okay, we could do that. But if we have, like, say, $100 in our reserve account, we're not going to let you take $1 out at a time, because that's going to cost us $22, and so our reserve is going to go from 100 to 78. And yeah, people got their money, but they only got $1 in their account. It seems a silly amount to send out. Now, if we instead limit it to, like, hey, if you're going to withdraw from your account, we've got a minimum of $10 right now. All those people with $1 in their account can't withdraw because they've got to have a minimum of $10. So going back to the original $10, what was it? Yeah, so the original 100, instead of sending it out to 100 different people, for this to make sense when you're talking about the math, instead they send out $10 to 10 different people. And then each of those $10 people choose to withdraw from the system. And so then we're talking about fees of 20 cents times 10 plus 2%. So the 2% is going to be about the same, right? 2% of $100 is the same as 2% of $10 as far as let's see, because I was saying with $1 it would be 22 cents for every $1, but with 2% of 10, man, dude, I'm not thinking right when it comes to math right now. But it would be 20 cents times 10 different transactions, which would be $2. And then 2% of that same $100, yeah, because it's still $100, right? For the total amount that is being withdrawn at one time. So 2% of 100, or 2% of $1 100 times is going to be the same thing as 2% of $10 10 times. So 2% of that 100 is going to be $2. So rather than spending $22 on our fees, what I actually ended up spending was $4. So as long as the system can be dynamic along those lines, it's like, okay, as long as we have enough in our reserve currency to handle any amount of transactions based on transaction fees, then we scale what you can, or the amount that you can withdraw. And if we've got $1 billion in the bank, then yeah, sure, you can withdraw $1 at a time. That's because at that point, we don't care about the little minor. It's one of those things. It depends on how much reserve currency is in the system, but the amount of reserve currency also determines how much gets paid out. This is okay. Sorry, this is what I started talking about and got completely sidetracked talking about this because, man, I spent weeks figuring out the logic behind all that in order to get it to be stable. I'm like, okay, as long as this is in place, as long as this is part of the system can't ever lose money. There will always be enough money to cover all transactions being withdrawn and all that sort of thing. That was the position. And that's okay, so that's one of the big things I want to talk about with all these social media companies. Minds right now is losing money. Gab right now, to the best of my knowledge, is losing money. BitChute is losing money. All these production companies, they're losing money because they don't have a business model that guarantees that they can maintain stability. And I was thinking with my system, the incentive to join my system is not, hey, we're not going to silence you, and so anybody who gets silenced from Twitter moves to this platform, because that's currently Gab's business model. Hey, you get silenced on Twitter, you move to a Gab. Oh, hello. That's their business model at the moment, which leads to an echo chamber of people who got kicked off of other platforms. The advantage I saw with my particular platform is, so not only is it a way of sending money to people, and once it's in the system, you could send however many transactions. You could send people 0.0 pennies, or yeah, 0.0001 pennies worth of stuff, and whatever. Granted, you couldn't withdraw that from your account. It's like, hey, this guy gave me 1/100th of a penny in my account. Thanks, random dude. You could do that in my system technically, although I think I would limit it to, you got to send at least $1, because nobody can do anything with anything less than $1 as far as withdrawing it from the system. So if you if you got 1 penny, you could never actually do anything with it. Anyway, so the incentive of my system was not just a free speech platform, but as a free speech platform where there would be, so the way I was setting it up is I've got one pool of money that is to cover all transaction fees. So any type of fee that my company would have to pay in order to maintain the system, in order to keep money flowing through it, I would have enough to cover all of that. Second pool of money would also, so that comes out of the fee for withdrawals and all that sort of thing. So there's two separate pools. One of those pools is money that recirculates in the system through what I was calling a lottery system, although that's granted that is technically accurate. People kept asking me if that was similar to gambling. I'm like, no, you don't pay into that part of the system. You can participate in the lottery system without spending a dime. So it's not a lottery as in the Illinois lottery or Powerball or something. It's not the same lines. Oh, okay. Well, thank you for joining me in the chat, Heartless. Yeah, I'm talking about man, I'm way off topic here talking about, but like I said, I talked about this. I spent 2 years of 2 years? At least a year and a half of my life doing this on my free time after work, working on this system, and was trying to develop support in it and got pretty much nothing. So like right now I'm just going over some of the main features of the program, and if somebody else wants to build this sort of thing, I've got all this, or at least I think all the schematics. You can add kind of limited on what I have access to on my laptop because most of it is on my primary desktop. But if somebody's interested in picking this up where I left off, I'm more than willing to give you guys the information and helping you out in that. But okay, so yeah, so anyway, if you're just joining me, the program, my system was called Funfair, and I say was called because I've mostly given up on the idea. However, 2 years from now, I might pick it up again. We'll see. If nobody else picks up the mantle, if nobody else comes up with a decent solution, if Jordan B. Peterson and Dave Rubin's enterprise ends up being an invite only, which is what they talked about, which seems incredibly counterproductive. So my way around that is to offer an incentive for people to join, where the more you use the system, the more chance you have of earning income. So this is completely separate from ad revenue, completely separate from subscription models. This is an independent system that is entirely supported based on how much money is in the system at any given point in time. And so there's two separate pools. One is to cover transaction cost on leaving and entering the system. The other one is a pool of money that gets recirculated randomly, and the randomness of this again is also based on like how many users are in there, how much participation, and there's so many factors on this. This was a nightmare to build. So every type of activity has a separate weighted amount, and this is something that's going to be kind of continually tweaked once it goes in, or if this ever goes into production, to try to balance, to strike a good balance of participation in the system. But I mean, like what you guys are doing right now, you're participating in the live chat. Essentially with my system, every time you did that, you would get a ticket, a potential. Like, so if you posted 100 times in this chat, you'd have 100 chances to win a random drawing on the system. Like, maybe it's only 50 cents, or maybe it's only $1. Oh well, you still have 100 chances out of maybe 100 out of, like, if there's only 1,000 people on the system, okay, then you've got a 100 out of 1,000 chance of winning $1. Okay, well, that's probably not, let's see, let's say out of 100,000, if you entered 100 times, you've got a 1 in 1, or 100 chance out of 100,000, so that's what, 1 in 1,000 chance of winning $1. That'd be more practical. Okay, but what did it cost you? Nothing. It's the same thing you would have done on Twitter. And what does Twitter give you? I mean, I'm on there almost all day, constantly checking on news and sort of things. I need to curb myself with that habit. But I've got thousands of posts on Twitter. What has Twitter ever given me in return? Nothing. Now imagine each one of those posts, those several thousand posts, was actually a chance to win, like even if it's only a chance to win $1. That's more than Twitter offers at the moment. Who's Liberal Sanity? I'm not familiar with that name. Anyway, so that was my incentive program, was based on the more you use our system, the more you produce videos, the more people you get involved in the system, the more you send money, the more every little transaction or every little action you could take within our system to participate in our system would reward you with a chance of earning extra income. And there was 3 separate lottery systems with different tiers and all that sort of thing. So there's a whole lot of logic that went into figuring out who could win, what are their odds of winning, and all that sort of thing. And this would be a running total that everybody has access to figure out, okay, what are my odds of winning? What is the current pool? And all of that would change based on the current network traffic, how many people are using it, how much money there is in the system overall. All of that is dynamic based on what's going on. Is pretty intense stuff. Pretty complicated, overly complicated. But once I got it working to the best of what I could tell, again, testing this on my system without actually submitting it to network traffic, which is that's a whole other, like, there's testing to do this, to simulate your system being used by millions of users. There's only so much I could test on my personal computer, although I did test it pretty heavily on having simulating. I think the highest I went was 10 million as far as connections to the server. Yeah. Granted, if you're talking about Facebook, where they have 1 billion users and stuff like that, it's like, but the odds of my system reaching 10 million without me having enough money to upgrade hardware and whatever requirements I would need to have more network traffic. From what I could tell, based on initial testing and all that sort of thing, system could handle 10 million. As far as the balancing of lottery wins and all that sort of things, that's whole nother ballpark. And that'd be something that would be like the initial launch. That'd be something that would be constantly tweaked and under maintenance to try to figure out what the right balance is, to make sure that people feel like there's actually, it's worth it to participate in the system. Because you don't want to give out like rewards that nobody cares about. And you're like, oh well, it's $1 and it took me 2 years to earn $1. And like, well, that's not a very significant incentive. So figuring out the exact amounts and what would actually stimulate people to participate and all that sort of thing. That's yeah. And the other thing about this particular system, because it's already processing financial transactions, you could use this for a storefront. That's something I figured out as I was building the system. I'm like, wait, this wasn't something I initially planned for, but if you wanted to use this to sell merchandise, to sell artwork, you could do that. It's not all about just, being a social media figure or, presenting videos or artwork on your, as far as your digital content. You could actually sell products to people and then ship them out to people. That was something that came across. I was like, oh, dude, you could use this as an entire storefront for your website. And everything that I was doing, yeah, I mean, I don't want to go too far. Oh, dude, I've talked about this for too long. Sorry, guys, for going on tangent. This is, like I said, I spent 1.5 years of my life dedicated to this, and it's like knives to try to come to the conclusion that I probably can't make this a reality. And if it does become a reality, it probably won't be until 2 to 3 years from now. But the whole reason I started talking about that was my, something like that, if I could launch that, that would be, yeah, I'm not sure what you mean, who do I debate with? Is that a question for Marianne or for me? Yeah, as far as that whole system that I had designed and built, if if 2 to 3 years from now, if there is not a good alternative to what is currently out there on social media, I might take a stab at it again and invest again. I'm gonna have to put more money into it of my own accord and try to at least get a launchable version, because right now I do not have a launchable version, specifically because it's going to require specific hardware and specific requirements for a payment processing system. Now, I could go through cloud computing, and Amazon Web Services and Microsoft, they all offer this sort of thing. The problem I determined with that is they could be the ones to shut me down, and the entire purpose of this was to have a completely independent system that isn't reliant on anyone else. So I wouldn't be reliant on PayPal or Stripe or Square or any of these other I would be my own payment processor. And in order to facilitate that, I'd have to have hardware and software that is completely within my control, that no one can take away from me. They may be able to block my network traffic, they may be able to take away my my DNS, but they could not stop me from processing payments. That is what was required, and that's the point that I got stuck on, because I thought or like when I initially started, I thought by the time I got there, I would have at least enough interest or possibly enough money in order to do that on my own. That didn't happen. I didn't get a near enough interest in the product. I didn't get near enough people willing to put money behind it and all that sort of thing. And it got to the point where the other side of that is my personal finances. The contract I was working at Hanford, where I was earning a very lucrative salary, had ended rather abruptly. And I was hoping to find work, because I was like, oh yeah, I'm in a high demand field. I should have been able to find a, maybe not as lucrative, but relatively lucrative job, and then I was going to use my excess income to keep furthering this project. And it ended up being a very, very long drought of steady work in programming between working at Hanford and getting this current job. And I worked miscellaneous odd jobs between, worked on a couple minor programming projects that, you're talking about things where I maybe made $100, and that's not a, it was like a day's worth of work and I made $100. So it's not bad money, but it's nothing compared to I was making 40, I was making, not 41, I was making $38 an hour, 40 hours a week, sometimes more than 40 hours a week, in addition to rental income, in addition to, so I was making really good money, and making $100 a day, not quite the same thing as making $38 an hour working 10-hour days, 10-hour days, 4 10s is what the schedule was. So making $100 for a day's worth of work doesn't quite compare to making $38 an hour. So I was making, was that $380 a day if you're working a 10-hour day? Yeah. So going from making nearly $400 a day to making close to $100 a day, $120 a day, not terrible, but not enough to support a business investment. So I had to drastically scale back a lot of things, and that's why I'm kind of like, while I'm in a situation right now where I'm good, I know that my system would work. It would be quality system, would actually give people what they want when it comes to a social media platform. It would actually give them free speech. It would actually give them a way to monetize what they're doing and turn this into a full-time job, replace the legacy media system. And the ways my system could be shut down, once the system was up and running, and once it had enough support where I could actually finance and start investing in other things outside of just getting a first version launch, all of that stuff could be resolved. And that's things like, oh yeah, well, Now, if all these people who are naysaying about these ideas is like, well, just look at Subscribestar. They started getting big, and then people shut them down. I'm like, yeah, that's because they had to rely on a third-party payment processor. My system doesn't have a third-party payment processor. We are our own payment processor. That's not an issue. The amount of ways they could attack the site are limited in scope, and there are technologies that are currently existing. You don't have, it's not stuff that we'd have to research, or it's just a matter of implementing it. And once implemented with so my minimum viability product for an actual launch was an expected user base within the first month of 100,000 users. If I had a system like that, and I had a significant revenue stream due to that larger user base, I could invest into the technologies or take the time to implement technologies that would completely circumvent the current ICANN, completely circumvent any other way of shutting down the network. These are technologies that have been out there for a while. I shouldn't say easy to implement. Could be implemented reasonably, provided a larger user base to start with. Anything less than 100,000 users on the network, it wouldn't make sense to use these other technologies, because these other technologies require people knowing about it prior to it being isolated. Because essentially, if you're not something that people can search on Google, you're going to be isolated. And that's what so that's the DNS attack. That was something that Gab lost their hosting. Oh yeah, I've debated what's his name? I was on a Owen McDonald. We had that was like a year ago, dude. So Owen McDonald was somebody I debated. There's a dude called Papa and Penguin. It wasn't a communist. No, that was about abortion. I've debated. That was dude. That was like when I first started this channel. More recently, I debated some dude named Charlie Green. You can. There's a list of debate videos on my. Or there's a playlist of debate videos on my channel. Debated a whole bunch of things. I'm trying to think of what other socialists I've actually gotten into a debate with. Well, the other guy that he claims he's not a socialist, he claims he's not a communist. I don't know if you know who Cult of Ham. I forget what he's calling himself nowadays. Something else. But when I was first introduced to him, he was calling himself Cult of Ham. Says he's not a socialist, and yet everything he advocates for is anti-capitalist. I'm like, you keep saying that you're a capitalist and you believe in free markets, and then everything you advocate for is the exact opposite. He's all like, single-payer healthcare, we have to do this. This is going to save us trillions. I'm like, no. No. The math doesn't add up, and all these studies disagree with you. The only people agreeing with you are the socialists. The communists. Richard Spencer agrees with you, okay. Like, all the people who are in your camp are leftist idiots. Ocasio-Cortez is the one citing the same studies as you. Bernie Sanders is the one, like, you are... Yeah, anyway, that's like the studies that you are citing and all this, like, those are the same things that, like, actual capitalists have debunked at length, and the only people who hold tight to them are all the communists. And you're like, I don't understand how you think you're a capitalist when you support something like that. Okay, yeah. So again, I'm sorry for going off on this big long rant. Holy moly, it's already 10 o'clock. Big long rant about this, but man, this is what I dedicated a huge chunk of my time and my life to, and it's unfortunate that I could not generate interest in the system. And I could not generate the required revenue. I'm like, well, maybe if I at least can get to launch, then people will start building up interest once they see it in action. I never got to that point. And so now I'm in a position where once I graduate, or once I finish this training section of it, and I get my OCA certification, I will be earning pretty significant salary, and with the potential to break that six-figure mark in a single year, which I haven't quite done. I've gotten close, but so I would have the potential to earn more than six figures a year, and I have a lot of disposable income. And right now, I guess that's counting my chickens before they hatch, right? I shouldn't even consider, like, well, once I have all that disposable income, I'm going to start investing it into funfair again. Nah, that's probably not prudent of me, and I need to keep, it's one of those things, it's like, I keep telling myself this would be awesome and this would be great. Yeah, maybe I need to convince myself and talk myself out of actually pursuing this any further. But we'll see. If nobody else wants to take up the mantle, and if social media is still in this stagnation, who knows? 2 years from now, you could see a full-fledged funfair get launched. But as of now, it is dead. I had people promising to help me raise funds, and then they turned out to, yeah, they were, I don't know, just, yeah, a lot of unfulfilled promises there. I had a couple business ventures that I thought would start to see, you know, more rapid increase in and then those kind of still seeing steady growth in those, but it's not as rampant as it was. So it was a little bit of a initial start, and then a huge boom, and then slow down, and now it's gradual increase. It's like, I was hoping that that initial boom would be enough to catapult funfair into launch, but it was not. Okay, so sorry for going off on this huge tangent about funfair. I forget why I started talking about it in the first place. I am sorry, guys, for going off on that huge tangent. I can't for the life of me remember why. I'm trying to tie everything back to the State of the Union address, and I am completely don't remember what I was talking about before I started talking about my baby, my project that died before it ever started. It would be something I would like to pursue in the future if I could. Alright, I don't think there was anything else about the State of the Union address that I wanted to cover. It's mostly, we started talking about Democrats versus Republicans. And yes, Democrats, I do think, are, let's say, the Republicans right now are the lesser of two evils. And yes, that is still technically evil. But if we're headed towards a cliff, right, if you're in a car and you're driving towards a cliff, would you rather have the one who has their foot on the gas full speed, or the one who is just going 5 miles an hour? Like the one who's going 100 miles an hour towards the edge of the cliff, or the one who's going, well, maybe not 5 miles, but somebody who's going 40 miles towards the cliff? Which of those two would you rather have? Well, I'd rather have the one going 40 miles an hour, because that gives me more time to try to change the direction of the vehicle before it goes off the cliff. And it seems to me like the Democrats want this to go 100 miles an hour or off the cliff. And once that goes off the cliff, you're talking about total economic collapse, civil war. That's not something I'm looking forward to. I know there's the collapsitarian meme, but how many thousands or millions of people are going to die when that happens? That is like the worst case scenario. It may be inevitable. It may be the case that whether it's Republicans or Democrats behind the wheel, we're going to go off that cliff no matter what. That might be unavoidable. I don't know if it is, but I'd rather put my money on Republicans and possibly trying to yank the wheel out of their hand and steer the car to remain on the road instead of going off the cliff. And the slower the speed towards the cliff is, the more chances there are, the more time there is to actually correct this vehicle and get it back on a correct path. Or possibly stop it altogether and put it in reverse and go the opposite way from the cliff. That's ultimately the goal. So that's why I support Trump and Republicans in general, even though I am an ANCAP. I do know that that is the ultimate goal. I disagree with other ANCAPs on how to get there. And I try to take the practical approach, like, okay, if the government is continually growing because of the borders, or because of influx of migrants, because of our public education system indoctrinating people to grow the size of government when they get old enough to vote, our insane insistence on being the world police through our military and invading other countries and building enemies and starting endless wars. All of these things are policies. I guess maybe the war thing, it seems to be Democrats and Republicans who are in favor of that. But at least when it comes to border, and when it comes to getting rid of the welfare state, and when it comes to reducing the size of government in those areas. And so, okay, so, sorry, going down another tangent, man. I need to stop, and it's already 10:30, and I do need to work on my project. Alright, so hopefully tying this thing up about what Trump has already done when it comes to government regulation and bureaucracy, is he has lived up to that part of his promise where he has cut the number of regulations that are currently in place, that are currently stifling our businesses. And even though he's made missteps in some areas, and he's been a blowhard and egotistical maniac, and there's a lot of things that he does wrong. And when it comes to sanctions and all that sort of thing, it seems like he doesn't understand economics at all. When it came to signing the omnibus spending package, was that 2018? Yeah, that was like last year around the same time. The spending bill that was signed was just absolutely atrocious when it comes to the bloat of government and all that sort of thing, and giving the Democrats pretty much everything they want, increasing the size of government on nonsense. There's a lot in there just so that way they could fit in the repeal of Obamacare's mandate. Seems like a small win at a huge cost on his part. But what he has done that is a ultimate, like, is the relaxation on the energy policies in the United States and the cutting of regulation has spurred an economic growth that isn't, granted there is a lot of bubbles inflating, but there is actual real legitimate growth that has been vastly increased due to the policies and some of the things that he's put into place very early on in his presidency, and he's continued to do throughout his presidency, that might be enough to course correct this vehicle so it doesn't drive off a cliff. And maybe by the skin of our teeth, we'll get maybe only a wheel to go off the cliff, and then the rest of the car will be able to soldier on without going into full economic collapse and or civil war. That may be wishful thinking, and that may be idealistic, but the idea of the only possible outcome being massive death and starvation and war and chaos, that's not something I am willing to entertain. That seems ultimately defeatist, and it's like saying, well, the whole system has to collapse so that way we can actually rebuild it the way it should have been built. I don't think that that is the only way to get towards an ANCAP society. Now, I would like to see the United States survive long enough to see the government reduce in size and all that sort of thing. But, okay, so I gotta go off on another tangent. Oh, man. Hopefully I can get this done in the next 4 minutes or so, because I do want to wrap this up by the time it hits 10:30 here. Okay. So I don't think the United States will ultimately become an anarcho-capitalist utopia or anarcho-capitalist society as a whole. because I think there's too much indoctrination in the people who are living here. There's too much indoctrination through our schools and through the media and through our government systems, through welfare programs. I mean, if the government went away today and was replaced by an anarcho-capitalist society, people's mindset would not have enough time to adapt. They would demand a new one take its place, and they would go through all the same motions, and they would be the same people who, when the United States won the Revolutionary War, there was a group of people who were advocating that we establish a monarchy here in the United States. Well, you'd have the same type of thing. And that, granted, the Revolutionary War didn't happen overnight. It wasn't. I'm talking about if this happened overnight, or if this was an instantaneous thing, you'd have people saying, "Oh, let's rebuild the system that we just escaped," and it would be a very large portion of the people. Because yeah, there was the people who wanted a republic, and there's people who wanted a monarchy. They wanted to establish George Washington as king. That was something Hamilton was supporting. There was a lot of people who were adamantly supporting him. Like, yeah, now we just want our own kingdom and we want it run this way. Yeah, they act as if the problem was who was running the system rather than the system itself. And you would have an overwhelming percentage of the current population. I mean, you're talking 80 to 90% of the current population. If the United States government collapsed and went away within a week or even a single evening or whatever the case might be, there would be people the hour that it finally ended, the very same hour, you would have 80% of the country trying to rebuild the United States the same way it was started. They would not fix the problems in the initial creation. They would not try to come up with better solutions. No, they would want to rebuild what was there. 80 to 90%. In the same way that people were saying, oh, we need a king. You would have 80-90% of the country still saying government is the answer. We just need the last people who ran the thing just did it wrong. We can rebuild it the exact same way, and as long as we run it correctly, it'll work. That'll be the mantra or the mindset of those people. That's part of why I don't think the United States will ever feasibly become an anarcho-capitalist state. Something like that is going to take generations to actually understand these concepts, and I think ultimately, the United States was in a very unique position that when the Revolutionary War happened, there were a lot of intelligent, well-educated people who had all embraced the ideas of the Enlightenment when it comes to our rights being natural and not the byproduct of a government, being inherent to ourselves, existent in us purely based on our own humanity. And that was a novel concept back then, and many of the founding fathers of the United States believed in those concepts and used them when formulating the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States itself. Now today, most people don't even agree on those fundamental principles, so they would try to build a government worse off than the original United States, and it would collapse even faster and all that sort of thing. But the other thing is, those ideas espoused during the Enlightenment were revolutionary at the time. And it is amazing that so many of the founding fathers embraced those ideas when formulating that new government. It's like something, or it's almost like a miracle. And after embracing those ideas and incorporating them into their new form of government, the rest of the world was able to see that new form of government and be like, hey, these guys are onto something. Okay, those guys, the United States is doing it this way and this way and this way. This is actually working. This is sustainable. They saw the example in practice, and they started incorporating some of those ideas in their own policies. Granted, no other country, to the best of my knowledge, has an actual freedom of speech in the same way the United States does. Which is why a lot of places crack down on hate speech, and Canada has hate speech laws, and UK has hate speech laws, and the Australia has hate speech laws, and in the United States, the Supreme Court has actually ruled against hate speech laws based on the First Amendment of the Constitution. So that's one area where we kind of have it right, where other people are trying to But a lot of other countries have embraced and modeled their governments after the United States, which is ultimately a step in a good direction. Granted, I know the idea is that government is to be good, but it can be less evil than other governments. And I'd rather have the United States government, even though it is corrupt, even though it is expanding expanding exponentially. It has problems, it has flaws, but I'd rather be in this system than in North Korea under a dictatorship or in Venezuela under a complete collapse. This system is better than those sorts of environments. Granted, it's not ideal, but it's the best of bad choices. And I think over time, making the best of bad choices is ultimately going to get to the point where eventually we can hopefully start to make good choices. So I started off this whole diatribe, this whole tangent, because I think the United States can be saved, and as in it's not going to go off of the cliff and either suffer another civil war or an economic collapse. But I don't think it's savable as in eliminating or changing it into an anarcho-capitalist society. I think what needs to happen is some other country needs to take up the mantle. Some other country needs to peacefully dissolve. Some other country that isn't as large or isn't as powerful, because you got to think the United States was nothing when they defeated England. They were not. They were a colony. They were not a country. They were not a superpower. They were the underdogs. And it took somebody in a position like that to establish a new form of government to show the world a better way than what they are currently doing. Not the best way, but better than what was currently in existence. And I think that's another landmass or region or country, whatever you want to call it. It's kind of, it wouldn't necessarily be a country because it would be an anarcho-capitalist society. It's not, country is government. But it would take some underdog starting a new place, creating a brand new system, operating completely without government and completely within anarcho-capitalist principles, and establishing a functioning society that doesn't get wiped out by some kind of natural disaster or somebody invading and taking over, which is surprisingly easier said than done. So some kind of country, I mean, something like Singapore or Hong Kong or one of these small island countries, establishing something like that and then seeing this underdog third world country explode and become one of the most powerful countries in the world within maybe a few decades or maybe even a single decade, that would pique people's interest and be like, okay, what are those guys doing that is correct? How are those guys making it succeed? And they would start to adopt principles or policies, or they would start to model their own societies off of the society that is showing them a better way of doing it. That's how ultimately I see anarcho-capitalism becoming kind of the dominant system of the world, is somebody else. I don't think the United States can fill that position because they are currently a superpower. Even after a collapse, like Russia went through a collapse and they still came out on top being a superpower. Well, I mean, the USSR collapsing and then becoming just Russia. Yeah, anyway, if the United States had a similar collapse, yes, it would, yeah, there'd be lots of death, lots of famine, lots of problems, terrible situation, recover, and more than likely still remain a superpower. I think in order for a country to completely embrace anarcho-capitalism, it would have to be an underdog country. It kind of have to be a country that everybody ignores, or that, you know, it's kind of, and then as soon as it gets established, as soon as it becomes stable, as soon as it starts rapidly increasing its production and its benefit, and like all of these things that it would start occurring in this single country, people would take notice and be like, what are these guys doing? Because this is where all the innovation is coming from. This is where massive increases in technology, yeah, all without a government. What are they doing? What they've, what's the trick? What's their secret? People would start looking into that and changing themselves according to it. At least that's my perspective on how it could actually happen. Well, that's difficult. So right now it seems that the left are invoking a racially based civil war with all of this. You can't say anything because you're a white male. That's like, oh, white people can't, well, black people can't be racist. It's only white people can be racist because they're the dominant culture, and all this hatred against white. And like, what has white ever done? Oh, they're responsible for slavery. All this. They're trying to stoke racial tensions because they. So it is possible that the United States could divulge into a complete civil war based on racial identity. And I think that would be the case. It would be whites versus, well, actually, it wouldn't even necessarily be whites versus everyone else, because there's a lot of self-hating white people who would be on the other side of that as well. And I'm like, dude, race. So okay, let me clarify that my position on this is race doesn't freaking matter. I'm mixed race and I'm mostly Asian. I don't care. That is technical about it. Like like I'm with Dennis Prager on this. My race matters as much as my eye color. Who cares? It's inconsequential when it comes to how much it impacts my life or the validity of my ideas or what I offer the world. My race is inconsequential. It's so it's such a minor impact on my character and my ideas that it's ultimately ignorable, because it's such it does play a factor, but it's such an insignificant factor that it's let's see, they've got a decimal places and they say round up to the least significant digit. Yeah, race is like right on the side of that. It's like, well, if it was one more digit in the number of my value, that extra digit past the current significant digit, it would be race. Race would be that extra thing that's just shy of being significant. Alright, at least that's from my personal perspective. But I think that there would be a lot of people who are on the left who think whites are all the victim, or all the evil people. They would put themselves against other whites and try to, attack people just based on skin color. They would think, oh, I'm one of the good whites and wear a uniform, whatever, like Antifa does, and then they would attack other, and then there would be minorities in the United States, people who would also attack whites, and I don't know where Asians would fall into this group, because, like I keep saying, Asians are super whites based on statistics. Like, if the United States is this white supremacist organization, Asians must be the most white supremacist of all. Higher average incomes, lower average crime, more higher rates of stable marriages, just across the board, every metric when it comes to Asians, higher IQs overall. It's not even a contest when it comes to the differences between Asians and whites. And you're like, well, if those are all the things that the white people have set up as establishments of their white supremacy, why are Asians so much better at all of that than whites, according to whites themselves? Yeah, anyway, I don't know where Asians would fall, if they would be considered super whites and the oppressive part of the oppressors. I don't know. There's that angle. And it looks like right now that has mostly subsided, although there have been, like, even this most recent incident with the Empire actor. But okay, so let's say that the most recent major event was the Covington kids, where the Native American guy and then the black Israelites were yelling at everybody in the media. A whole bunch of the leftists are condemning the Covington kids. I'm like, dude, those guys are standing there minding their own business. People come up to them, hurl racial slurs at them, call them all kinds of names. I don't know if you heard the videos of the black Israelite dudes calling black members of their school racial slurs against that. And black Israelites guys get a free pass because they're a minority. It's the black kid who goes to Covington doesn't get a free pass. I don't understand the mental gymnastics here. But that's something that happened just recently, and the media was all over it, trying to stir up this racial divide. At some point, there's going to be a tipping point where one group or the other is like, you know what, this happens too much. And then there's a more recent thing, but it hasn't been as big, which is the actor from Empire talking about being attacked and being assaulted by MAGA hat wearer people. No evidence to any of his claims, and police are starting to think that he's just full of shit. And most people have already called it and were like, yeah, somebody in the middle of a, what they called it, polar vortex, saw somebody, recognized him from a TV show they probably don't watch, knew that he was gay, attacked him in less than a minute, poured bleach on him and his stuff, no evidence of bleaching to his skin, no evidence of bleaching to his clothing, put a noose around his neck and beat him, but no cracked ribs, no sign of actual injury. We don't know what happened, and left a noose around his neck. The whole story is just completely bizarre. If it actually did happen, at that point, somebody willing to go to that length, they didn't actually permanently injure the guy or cripple the guy or end his life. He was like, well, they hated him enough and knew enough about him to do all these things, but they didn't. They're like, oh, but okay, so the streaming. Oh, dude, it's already 10:40, dude. I'm gonna end up ending this rate. Okay, so the racial divide, there's a definite agenda to try to split the country based on racial lines. Everybody's considering anybody who's in support of Republicans or in support of Trump is an automatic racist, and anybody who's in support of the wall is an automatic racist. They're trying to build those divides, and eventually that's going to create a tipping point for the country where it turns into a civil war based on racial divisions. That could happen at any moment. It seems like the entire country is a powder keg, and all it's going to take is one incident, and then that's going to be it. Now, that could all be subdued, and that could all be dissipated. That's kind of it's more like an all or nothing kind of thing. It may only take one spark to set off a huge chain of events that's unavoidable. Or it could just turn into nothing. It could just be a whole lot of hot air that just dissipates, and then tension as the economy gets better, tensions die down, and then people are like, whatever, it's not so bad. Yeah, sure, whatever. All whites are racist. Who cares? I'm making good money. I've got a good job, and people will care about their regular lives and won't pay attention to all that nonsense. The other thing that actually mathematically seems unavoidable is an economic collapse, and based on who you're listening to or who you're talking to, 2 to 3 years, the United States has an inevitable economic collapse. Now, it's possible that this could be avoided, although what we're currently doing, not doing anything to stop it. Like stream, there are at least 4 major bubbles in the U.S. economy right now, and those 2006 housing crisis size bubbles you're talking about. So the automobile industry, stock markets, housing bubble has been reinflating, and I want to say it's health insurance, although I'm not sure if that's the other market that is like that. I know it's at least 4 markets where they are artificially inflated right now. And yes, the numbers are doing really, really well and all that sort of thing, but it's fake, it's false, it's all due to what they ended up doing to mitigate the effects of the housing crisis from 2006, or actually 2008, I think, is the official year they recognized it, although started 2006 anyway. I think they, like, most people say 2008 because that's when they saw the bulk of it, but it was unavoidable in 2006. At 2006, it was too late. They'd passed the point of no return, and it was going to happen, and it just, yeah. Anyway, was it 2008? Yeah, it was 2000, or am I getting my dates wrong here? Yeah, anyway, I'm just going to start calling, yeah, the housing bubble or whatever. Now we have, so in order to mitigate the effects of that collapse, they started inflating the bubble that ended up becoming a stock market bubble. And then a side effect of that was also putting money into automobiles, as far as, and so there is this, okay, so this is all manipulation from the Federal Reserve, setting interest rates really, really low, which means it's encouraging people to make investments they wouldn't otherwise make because the interest rates are low, money is cheap. That's the way. And so what this did is this actually inflated other economic sectors that wouldn't be where they are right now if interest rates weren't so low. And this is, you can see this across anytime the Federal Reserve talks about increasing interest rates, stock market shudders. All these other industries, all these things start to collapse because there's even there's a whiff that these interest rates might go up, all of these markets become unviable and people start leaving in droves. And that's the problem we encounter right now, is if the Federal Reserve is at a position where they need to increase interest rates and they are unable to, because every time they talk about it, every time they increase it slightly, economic collapse, everything goes, and they're stuck between a rock and a hard place when it comes to that. But the situation is such that the interest rates being as low as they are is not something that can go on indefinitely. Mathematically, that which cannot continue will not continue. That's something Stefan Monlu says a lot, and it's absolutely brilliant way of describing the situation. What they've locked themselves into is not a sustainable model. The only thing that keeps it going is the illusion that this is all actual growth, and it's not actual growth; it is artificial growth. Oh, I don't know what's kind of significant event. It could be something stupid and trivial. If you look at if you look at what happened in the riots in Ferguson, it was a false report about a criminal act. Riots and businesses destroyed, things set on fire, all based off of a false story about somebody attacking a cop and being shot in the process. I don't know. It might be, well, the Super Bowl's over, but I was thinking it might be something to do with some sports event where somebody does the equivalent of Colin Kaepernick and takes a knee, and everyone's like, yeah, this is it, and then they rally behind that and start. I don't know. I've stopped trying to anticipate, because at that point you're talking about mob mentality, and mob mentality is insane. And predicting insanity is, if it was predictable, it wouldn't be insanity. You can expect it to be insane, but you can't expect to be able to predict what the insanity thing or the insane will do. Let's see. Yeah. So anyway, from what I'm being optimistic and thinking that an economic collapse will take at least 3 years to actually. We'll see another economic collapse along the same lines as the housing bubble collapse. It's going to be that, but it's going to be anywhere from 5 to 10 times as devastating. That seems to be almost unavoidable. Now, I've talked about this in the past. It is possible to avoid that if in the next 2 to 3 years we start massively spinning up nuclear power in the United States. Not likely to happen. If we replace all of our coal and oil and natural gas and all of these other inefficient fuels with nuclear reactors, we could supply all of the nation's energy needs at fractions of the current cost. And if you're talking about reducing the cost of operating businesses, that is real productive value in the United States. That will ignite a fire under other industries. We'll see brand new industries emerging out of this because the lower your energy cost is, the cheaper it is to run your business. You'll see this huge ripple across the market in lowering energy production costs that would come with going entirely nuclear. Not going to happen because there's too many crazies who think nuclear power is evil, or, oh, what about all the harmful effects? Yeah. Nonsense of people who don't understand the actual technology. These are the same eco-freaks who talk about don't drive your SUV as they get on their, their private jets, and they're like, oh yeah, those are the same nuclear power, which if you're afraid of CO2, nuclear power, next to nothing when it comes to CO2 emissions. If you're so afraid of CO2, you should be in complete support of that. They're not, because they're insane. Anyway, if we move to either completely or mostly nuclear power within the next 2 to 3 years, the increase in production that would result from that would be so astronomically high. Our economy could be growing at a real rate that could catch up to the current artificial rate. So if there is a collapse, it will be minor because, okay, so if you're so that picture a bubble, right? So you're inflating it with air. You poke it with a needle, it deflates, it all goes back to, it shrinks and collapses completely, right? Sorry, a balloon. Right? So you got a rubber balloon, you fill it up with air, you poke it with a needle, it shrinks and collapses, and it turns into a flat balloon again. Same balloon, fill it up with sand. Or if you've got like 2 entrances to the, I guess, I don't know if this quite works when you're talking about balloon. I think theoretically you could do so if you had a balloon and you had some kind of like a funnel going into the balloon, and the funnel was sealed off, and air and sand were in the top of this, and they were falling into the balloon, right? So you got air falling into the balloon. No. So you've got something that's pumping air, and there's also sand falling into the balloon, right? If the rate of sand going into the balloon, that's probably a bad analogy. I was trying to come up with some easier way of talking about this. Right, that's the best way I can think of. Sorry if this is a confusing analogy or if this is a confusing example. Hopefully it makes sense by the time I'm done. So if it's just completely filled up with air, when it pops, it's going to collapse completely until there's nothing but the rubber. Now, if there's something solid inside, which is I talked about, adding sand or adding rocks or anything into this balloon, so it can inflate with air, but as long as there's something solid being put into this same balloon, at the same time it's being pumped up with air, right? So it's being pumped up with air, it gets to this size, it's staying at that size, needle's coming for it, the needle's going to poke the balloon. Well, if in the meantime something solid is being put into that balloon, needle comes along, pops it, well, that balloon is going to shrink as the air escapes, and it's going to stop shrinking as soon as it hits that solid surface. The solid surface in this bizarre analogy is the actual production of the company. What we're actually producing, our actual economic worth. Right now we've got this inflated economic worth based on low interest rates from the Fed, borrowing, or a country borrowing itself into debt, and all of these other policies that it's artificial growth. In the same way that if you have a credit card with a $100,000 limit, but you're only, and you're earning $1,000 a month, but you're spending $2,000 a month. Yeah, you can keep charging that credit card, and yeah, everything's great because you're still like, hey, you're spending twice of what you actually earn, and everything's going great, and you're buying all this, nice stuff, but once you hit that limit, you can't keep buying stuff, and you're still spending $2,000 a month, but you're only earning $1,000 a month. Big collapse, right? It's kind of a similar situation. It's like, yeah, right now we've got this situation where this bubble is inflating because we're racking up that credit card, and we're getting close to the limit on that credit card. Well, as long as the air in this balloon is the equivalent of the credit card that we're spending, as soon as that credit card reaches its limits, that's the needle poking the balloon, and all of that credit comes collapsing, right? All that extra credit, it's like, oh, this was nothing money. This was fake money. This was imaginary debt. All goes out of the balloon, and it shrinks back to what is real. That would be, in this the argument I just making, that would be your actual $1,000 a month. So your ability to spend more than you make collapses, and now you're left with just that 1,000. Now, as you're spending on your credit card, if you're currently making $1,000 a month and you're spending $2,000 a month, right? That's what inflated your bubble to begin with. Now, if in the meantime, before you reach the maximum on that card, you increase your income and now you're making $1,500 a month. Well, now you're still charging your credit card. Okay, now you're making $1,800 a month and you're still charging your credit card, but you haven't reached your limit. When that needle pops, instead of being $1,000 a month in the hole, maybe you're only $200 a month in the hole. Maybe you're only $100 a month in the hole. Maybe you're actually earning more and you're still spending $2,000. And you're like, why was I spending my credit card at all? I actually have enough where I don't need to use my credit card. And you stop using your credit card and actually start paying off your debt. Sorry, yeah, I guess my analogy is all over the place. Hopefully this sort of made sense when talking about that. It made sense in my mind, but then again, my mind is a scary place. Ah, dude, it is 11 o'clock. I do need to go to bed. I still got to work on my project for like 2 hours. And then wake up at 6 and do this all over again, with the exception of the stream. Yeah, so if we can, so right now we're in these bubbles, and if we can fill these bubbles with legitimate growth, with legitimate economic growth, it might be to the point that when that needle pops and when we're out of our credit limit, it won't matter because the bubble will shrink, but it can only shrink to the actual growth of, or to the actual state of our economy. And if our actual economy is growing at a significant rate between now and the economic collapse will probably still happen, but it won't be as devastating the more our economy actually grows, legitimately. Yeah, I probably made that more confusing and muddled than it needed to be in trying to make analogies and explanations. Yeah, I think I did better with the credit card thing. If you're actually increasing your actual income every year, or consistently, if you're originally $1,000 on credit, and then you start making more money, and to get to the point where, like, hey, maybe you're earning $2,000 a month, and then that credit doesn't matter as much. Oh, okay, so I guess is a better way. So you start off making $1,000 a month, and you're spending $1,000 on credit. Well, if that credit card runs out, half of your income or half of your monthly spending is now, you can't do it anymore. You lose it. And but say you doubled your income and now you're making $2,000 a month, but you're still spending $1,000 on credit. Okay, but when that credit card maxes out, instead of losing half of your income, you lose a third of your income. Still pretty bad, still pretty devastating. Not as bad as losing half of your spending power. Now, let's keep making the same scenario. Like, so, okay, instead of earning $2,000 a month or whatever, now you're earning $3,000 a month, and you're still spending $1,000 on credit card. Well, now, okay, collapse happens, you're fourth, right? So the more this goes, the smaller percentage the amount you're putting on credit is. And so that's, granted, it's not a foolproof analogy to what our actual spending and what our actual bubble is, because right now we've got a bubble that is growing, but it's point of the analogy is our actual production could catch up to the inflated amount, or at least mitigate the inflated amount, so that way it's not so much of our, it's not, it will be a lesser percentage of the overall economy. Like if it collapses right now, we're probably looking at a 40% collapse in our economy. But as our economy's actual value produces, maybe once it actually collapses, instead of it being 40%, maybe it's only going to be 20%. Or if we start switching over everything to nuclear and we build these entirely new industries that didn't even exist, this year, we might be able to see, when that economic collapse hit, we might only lose 10% of our economy. That's something easily recovered from. All right. Yeah, I don't know if it's great when I go off on analogies like that. Hopefully the ideas I'm trying to express are getting through, and it is now after 11, and I do have to go. Thanks for everybody who joined me and was bothered to listen to what I have to say. Greatly appreciated. And I'm going to end this stream by saying, do not subscribe to me, because if you have... Oh, wait, no, that's not the way of saying it. If I have to remind you to like and subscribe, and that's the only thing that's going to get you to like or subscribe, do not like or subscribe to my channel. I don't want you. If you haven't figured out how to use YouTube by this point, and you need somebody to remind you, yeah, I don't want any part to do. I don't want anything to do with you. Yeah, good night, everybody. I'll come up with a better way of stating that idea. As far as, yeah, if you don't know how to use YouTube at this point, I'm not going to bother explaining how to use it at the end of my videos. Although I still did say like and subscribe. Dang it, there's got to be a way of expressing that without saying it the same way. Anyway, maybe I should say, if I got to tell you what to do at the end of the video and you don't know better by now, then I don't want you, then I don't need you to do it. No, that doesn't... Yeah. Anyway, trying not to sound like everybody else when they end their video, but I'm ultimately sounding like everybody else when they end their video. So thanks, everybody, and I'll try to see you next week. Again, I'm not sure if I'll be able to make it next week, but we'll see. Alright, I'm going to stop the broadcast.